we were talking about this before, weren't we? That when you get, for instance, like the long and the short sounds right, you do immediately sound more Swedish.
Yes, you do. You do. It's just so significant once you get that, just the right framing of the lips or something, and all of a sudden people just start sounding really Swedish.
Yeah, yeah. It's fantastic, and it's been an amazing journey this last year. So I suppose we're kind of taking all of that work and starting now a series of workshops, really going into a bit more depth about each sound.
Yeah. Oh, it's going to be so exciting. So tell me a little bit more about the whole Estill voice training method, because it's just so it's just so central in what we've been doing for the last year, I'm thinking.
It is really interesting. I mean, well, you have to ask questions as we go along. I'll talk a little bit about it, but I was watching videos on YouTube and about Swedish vowels and other vowels too, and you're struck by what we often get is this thing where people say, repeat after me, and you try, and you might get it right. You might be one of those natural parrots who gets it all right, but then you might not. And I find that well, Estill voice training is kind of one of the things that we do, is that we isolate structures of the voice and work them in isolation. So what does that mean? Well, it means that those skills that we learn can be applied to anything about the voice. So they can be applied to, opera singing, pop singing, people who speak for a living, priests, teachers, and people who are learning languages. It was a new thing for me, I think, to take, for instance, the structures of the tongue and the lips and ask ourselves, what are we actually doing to make these sounds? What are the options, and how can we train them? And I think then people can learn to make these sounds without always having to take that route through their own language.
Yes.
Yeah, that's kind of it's quite a big thing, in voice training, and in maybe particularly in singing. The ear, listening to the voice, is what dominates, and I think it might be true in language learning as well. But actually, if you want a reliable outcome, it is cleverer in a way to do the same thing with the muscles every time. So you learn in a way to listen to your muscles and train them, instead of just thinking, "Ooh, how can I make this sound that I'm hearing?" So I think it gives a more reliable outcome.
That's so interesting. I'm thinking of, like, it's almost like if you're learning like some kind of physical skill, I don't know, some gymnastics or something, you have to train your muscles then too, and it has to be, or you're riding a horse, or I don't know, anything. And instead of just looking and trying to copying, you need to kind of integrate it into your body.
Yeah.
And feel it.
Yeah.
And almost like do it so many times and work those muscles in a particular way so that your body does it automatically. And I'm feeling that's maybe what happens when you train with the Estill voice training method.
Yeah, exactly. And you were saying about, finding a new state which you don't have to think about. I know we talk about something in Estill. We borrowed this concept into Estill voice training about attractor states. Basically, what is our habits and our stable habits, like with horse riding? What is the stable thing that makes it kind of work? And if you haven't got that initially, you might, as you say, have to go into it and train yourself to find a new stable habit, a new attractor state. And I think the habits or the attractor states around our language, because we practice it every day, all day, I mean, it's this thing of tongue twister, isn't it? Of course, it's going to be a tongue twister if you're trying a new language.
Of course, everything is going to be a tongue twister to begin with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And but with careful training, you can find a new way and a new attractor state, a new habit. That's it seems very simple, but there's a huge wisdom in that is really fun.
Yeah, it is so much fun. But I also think, like, maybe sometimes when we think about speaking, we just think, well, almost everyone can speak, right? So you're already using your tongue and your lips and your larynx and whatever you do, and it's just, and then you're just going to say different words. So why doesn't that work? Oh, well, it might work, but then you might have a very strong accent, or you might pronounce words in the wrong way, and you might have misunderstandings. So why doesn't it work just by using the tongue that you're born with and the lips that you're born with? Like, explain that. Why do you need to train more when you're learning a language?
Wow. I mean, I'm not sure that there is a definite answer, but it's almost like some people are probably born with a very instant coordination between their brain and their listening to languages and the tongue, lips, vocal tract, making it happen for them. Perhaps, it's just like some people have are very good at drawing, because their brain, their eye-to-hand coordination is just there. But you can learn that too. So, and I think it is using the muscle training, the muscle awareness, to go into those little shades of gray between a tiny shift of the tongue that makes all the difference, really. We are very attuned to those little changes.
Yes, we are. We really are. And as we will go through a bit in these masterclasses, and of course we have some examples of that in the Speak Like a Swede course as well. If you get it wrong, things can go really wrong in terms of what you're saying, right?
You mean when you mispronounce in a way that it can be you say the wrong word, basically. Yeah. And I thought it was interesting what you were saying. I think you said when we were doing some work earlier on, and you were saying that I was telling you about my parents and that they sometimes struggle to understand an English accent, and that we're very sensitive to the right pronunciation, and Swedes are not necessarily very good at recognizing, for instance, an English accent.
No, we're not. We are really not that great. I mean, some people do and some people don't, but I think as a country, we're not particularly that good, and that can be so demoralizing. I have so many students who just feel like, they can speak and it sounds okay, it's close enough, and then they come to Sweden and people just look like, what are you saying? And they try and say it, and they're like, people don't understand what they're saying, and then they correct them, maybe they get some feedback, and they can't hear the difference. They're like, but that's what I said. And that's what I thought I said. And then it might just be that what actually happened was their tongue was a bit too high or a bit too low, or they didn't quite engage certain muscles, and they just weren't aware.
Yeah. And I suppose you only experience that with training and becoming more aware. And but it is very interesting. And I mean, so say, this idea of listening more to muscles than to, of course, we have to listen. As a musician, of course, you have to listen to the pitches, you have to listen to the music, but for the sheer voice quality and the sound, the muscles are more reliable. I mean, it comes up for me when I coach people and when I sing myself, when you have to come up with voice on demand, when you get a bit nervous. It's not always the best thing to go on feeling and to, just kind of go for it. Okay, so you might have one of those days too, but often you would have traveled, you just had a cold, whatever. So knowing what to do muscularly is far more reliable. Knowing what it feels like when you're in balance, and that's from me as a singer. But it's been so interesting to borrow this into learning a new language. It's
and this is it. And I just feel like I mean I've taught Swedish for so many years now, and this method that we've kind of worked with, that you're trained in, has just given the how to.
I think
that is
so.
exactly what it is doing. So it's not just saying, like you said before, this is o and this is and this is or whatever, and now repeat. It's just saying, no, actually, how do you do that? I can hear it maybe, but what comes out of my mouth is something different. And I don't, or maybe I'm occasionally saying it right, but I don't know what I'm doing.
Yes. I mean, it's so interesting. I know that Jo Estill, who I never knew personally, she died in 2010, but I believe she used the leading question through her research and lecturing and teaching was, how am I doing this? And it's because when she started her work sort of in the late 70s and researching, there were big holes in the knowledge, and she found that there were answers to some questions, but there were lots of things that people just didn't know. How are the mechanics working? How am I doing this? And in the same way, I've been surprised to find that in language courses, the pronunciation bit is just, it's those pages right at the front or right at the back with the phonetic alphabet, and you look at it and you go, oh,
yes. Okay, so that's the phonetic symbol for o, but that doesn't help me. How do I do that? I just had a question about what was her name? Jo Estill. Did she do this originally for the purpose of singing, or did she work with language training too?
It was, she was an opera singer, and she came back into, after having had kids, she came back into music education in her sort of mid-40s. And then she started this research. I think it was, first of all, it was a matter of mapping out, researching, finding out how the voice works, mostly for singers. But as she proposed the idea that you can train these structures in isolation, which was a completely new thing then, it kind of broadens it instantly. I don't think it was meant like that, but I mean, people who train, accent coaches on a film set, or someone who reads the weather, they can all benefit from this. Speech and language therapists use it a lot because it's a very sort of practical tool. So I don't think it was meant for everyone initially. It's really for singers, but the way it developed meant that anyone can use it.